My name is Sienna. I'm 31 years old, and I spent 14 months planning my wedding on a budget I built myself. Waiting tables on weekends, picking up freelance graphic design gigs at night, so I'd never have to ask my parents for a single dollar. I wanted this one day to be mine. Untouched by the favoritism that had shaped every family gathering since I was a teenager, this is second seat stories. And even that small hope got crushed 3 days before I walked down the aisle. My mother sent a text I read sitting on my bathroom floor, still in my wedding dress, mid-final fitting. The words are burned into me. My brother Desmond's business trip to Singapore mattered more than what she called my little party. And she and my father had already booked flights to see him, off at the airport instead of coming to my ceremony. I stared at that message for almost 10 minutes, waiting for a follow-up. A joke, an apology, anything to soften it. Nothing came. My father, who'd promised for over a year he'd walk me down the aisle, replied to my mother's message with a thumbs-up emoji. As if that settled it. Growing up, I was the quiet achievement nobody noticed. Desmond got the trophies on the mantle, the college fund that never ran dry, constant praise for choices that were, frankly, unremarkable. I got a scholarship to state school, earned entirely on my own, and my mother's response was to ask why I hadn't applied somewhere with better name recognition. I learned early that competing for their attention was pointless. So I stopped and built a life that didn't depend on their approval. I met my fiancé Rowan 2 years ago at a pottery class I signed up for on a whim. From the first conversation, he made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. He proposed on a hiking trail we'd walked a dozen times, at the exact spot we'd first talked about what we both wanted out of life. Planning our wedding together was the first time in my life I felt like a priority to anyone, which is exactly why that text cut so deep. By the morning of the wedding, my parents were already boarding a flight to Singapore. I found out through a photo my aunt sent. My mother and father grinning in an airport lounge, my brother between them holding his boarding pass like a prize. I had 4 hours before the ceremony. No one to walk me down the aisle. My coordinator, a steady woman named Odalise, noticed I'd gone pale reading the photo and asked what was wrong. When I explained, she didn't offer pity. She offered a solution. The venue's landscape architect, a widower named Julian Thorne, who'd been overseeing the garden restoration for 3 weeks while we finalized details, had mentioned more than once how impressive my planning had been. How rare it was to see a bride handle every detail herself without complaint. Odalise asked if I wanted her to see whether he'd step in. I laughed at first. Having a near stranger walk me down the aisle at my own wedding felt absurd, but desperation and dignity make strange bedfellows. And within the hour I was sitting across from Julian in the venue's greenhouse, watching him listen to my situation with a seriousness that surprised me. He said yes without hesitation. Told me family isn't only defined by blood, and that he'd be honored. Walking down that aisle on the arm of a man I'd known 3 weeks wasn't the moment I'd pictured a year earlier. But it became something real. I smiled the whole way. Not the practiced photo smile brides are taught, but a genuine one. Because for the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there. My best friend caught the whole walk on video, planning to post it as a small highlight for our friends. Neither of us expected what happened next. By Monday, that clip had crossed 1 million views. Comments poured in from strangers who'd pieced the story together from the caption alone, people calling it the most quietly devastating and beautiful thing they'd seen in months. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My mother called 61 times in a single day, each voicemail more frantic than the last, until the final one landed with a piece of information that changed everything. Her voice was shaking. My father's boss had seen the video circulating online, recognized the man walking me down the aisle instantly, and needed to speak with my father in his office first thing Monday morning. Because apparently, he knew exactly who Julian Thorne really was. I listened to that voicemail 3 more times to be sure I understood. It turned out Julian wasn't simply a landscape architect hired for a temporary project. He was the founder of Thorne Horticultural Group, a company that had quietly acquired several of the largest commercial landscaping contracts in the state, including the one tied to the corporate campus where my father had worked for 11 years. My father's boss, a man named Gerald Wickham, sat on the board that had personally approved that contract renewal months earlier, and had met Julian face-to-face at the signing. When that wedding video crossed his desk, he didn't need context. He recognized the man in the navy suit instantly, and the sight of one of the company's most valuable business partners standing in for a father who'd abandoned his own daughter wasn't something he could simply scroll past. Gerald called my father in first thing Monday. According to my father's own panicked retelling later, the meeting was brutal. Gerald asked bluntly why a respected business partner had been standing in for him at his own daughter's wedding. My father stammered through some excuse about a family emergency involving my brother. Gerald reportedly cut him off, said he didn't appreciate being lied to, and found it difficult to trust the judgment of a man who'd abandoned his own child for something as replaceable as an airport departure. My father's standing at that company had never been untouchable. This became the excuse leadership needed to sideline him from the promotion he'd been angling toward for over a year. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that, just a strange, hollow confirmation. The people I'd spent my whole life trying to please had built their world on the exact same conditional love they'd always shown me. And now it was collapsing under its own weight. My mother's calls didn't stop, message after message insisting I needed to publicly clarify things, post something explaining it was all a misunderstanding, that of course they loved me, that I was blowing this out of proportion. I let every call go to voicemail for 4 days while Rowan and I honeymooned in the mountains, finally away from the noise. When I did call her back, I kept my voice level. Told her I wasn't interested in managing her image or smoothing over what she and my father had chosen to do. Told her choosing Desmond's flight over my wedding wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and decisions have consequences, whether or not the internet happens to notice them. She cried. She argued. She listed every sacrifice she claimed to have made raising me. I let her finish, then told her calmly that I hoped she and Dad could figure out how to rebuild whatever they damaged at his job, but that it had nothing to do with me anymore. Julian and I stayed in touch after the wedding. What started as a favor between near strangers became a real friendship. He told me, over coffee a few weeks later, that he'd lost his own daughter in a car accident 6 years earlier, and that walking me down that aisle had given him something he thought he'd never feel again. The quiet honor of standing beside someone on the most important day of her life. He said watching my parents' absence with his own eyes had made him genuinely angry, because he knew firsthand what it meant to lose the chance to walk a daughter down an aisle, and he couldn't understand two people choosing to give that chance away. Voluntarily, Rowan and I started having him over for dinner regularly. He slowly became a fixture in our life, the kind of steady presence my own parents never managed to be. My brother Desmond reached out months later, awkward and apologetic. Told me he hadn't asked our parents to skip my wedding, and felt sick when he learned what they'd done in his name. I believed him. We've slowly started rebuilding something separate from our parents' dysfunction. A relationship that doesn't require either of us to compete for scraps of attention anymore. Looking back, I wouldn't change a single detail of that day, even the parts that broke my heart at the time, because everything that followed taught me more about who truly shows up for people than 3 decades of trying to earn my parents' approval ever did. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. This is Second Seat Stories, and there's a new one every week.